On a Friday night, everything began. My wife of 8 years, Stephanie, and I received an invitation to her best friend Alice's birthday party. Stephanie and Alice had been inseparable since college, and over the years, we'd attended countless gatherings at Alice's home. This one didn't seem any different. Stephanie looked stunning in her blue dress as we got ready. Her hair was styled to perfection, and the dress hugged her figure beautifully. She asked me how she looked. As gorgeous as ever, I replied with a grin. She chuckled and said, "You better not outshine her." It's Alice's night, after all. We arrived at Alice's house around 8 p.m. The place was buzzing with both familiar faces and strangers. Alice greeted us at the door, holding a drink in one hand. She embraced Stephanie warmly. "Stephanie, Ben, I'm so glad you both could make it," she said. The music was loud, and laughter filled the air as the party was in full swing. Stephanie and I stuck together for a while, chatting with friends and enjoying a couple of drinks to loosen up. That's when I noticed him. He was tall, standing across the room with a whiskey glass in hand, his gaze fixed on Stephanie. His broad shoulders and the smug smile he wore sent a strange chill down my spine. Whether it was the alcohol or some gut feeling, I couldn't shake the unease his presence gave me. I nudged Stephanie and asked, "Who's that guy?" She followed my gaze. "Oh, that's just Alice's friend, Ryan," she said casually. "I think I met him last year at her housewarming party." Ryan raised his glass slightly in our direction, and Stephanie returned the gesture with a polite smile. She noticed my expression and laughed. "Relax, Ben. He's harmless." "Of course," I muttered, forcing myself to let it go. I reasoned that I was just overreacting. Stephanie wasn't giving him much attention, laughing and chatting with her friends like she always did. After a while, I realized I'd lost sight of her in the crowd. Not wanting to panic, I scanned the room. She wasn't nearby. I noticed Alice engrossed in a conversation with some guests by the dining area. "Hey, Alice," I said, keeping my tone light. "Have you seen Stephanie?" Alice paused to think. "Last I saw, she was heading to the kitchen. She should still be there." "Thanks," I said, heading toward the kitchen. Rounding the corner, I froze. Stephanie was at the counter with Ryan. He was leaning in, far too close for my liking as they talked. Their heads were tilted toward each other, and Stephanie was laughing, holding her drink in one hand and absent-mindedly touching her necklace with the other. My jaw tightened, and I strode toward them, fists clenched. "Stephanie," I called, my tone sharper than I intended. They both turned to look at me. Stephanie's smile faltered slightly. "Hey, Ben, what's wrong?" I ignored her question and glared at Ryan. "Mind if I interrupt?" Ryan raised his hands defensively. "No problem, man. We were just talking." I turned my attention to Stephanie, blocking him out completely. "Can we talk?" After hesitating for a moment, she nodded. "Sure." We walked back to the living room, where the hum of music and lively chatter surrounded us. Despite the noise, my thoughts were solely on her. Lowering her drink onto the table, she turned to me. "Why were you alone with him in there?" I asked quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. Her expression darkened. "We were just talking." "What's the issue?" "The issue," I said, working to contain my frustration, "is the way he was leaning into you. He wasn't just talking, Stephanie. It didn't look innocent." Crossing her arms, she met my gaze with defiance. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Ryan is Alice's friend. Nothing was going on. It was just a conversation." I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process her response. "It's not just about talking. The way he looks at you, Stephanie, it's disrespectful. To me, and to our marriage." Her shoulders sagged slightly, and her expression softened. "If it upset you, I'm sorry. I promise there's nothing to worry about. Can we please just enjoy the party?" The sincerity in her eyes made me pause. I wanted to push further, but something about her tone stopped me. "Fine," I said, my voice quieter now. "But stay away from him." She nodded. "Okay, Even though we returned to mingling, a weight settled in my chest, refusing to lift. I made an effort to engage in conversations, and even laughed at a few jokes, but my thoughts remained scattered. About an hour later, I found myself deep in conversation with a co-worker who happened to be at the party. Stephanie excused herself to grab another drink. I didn't think much of it at the time, but as the minutes stretched on, I realized she hadn't come back. Scanning the room, I couldn't spot her. I checked the kitchen first, thinking she might be chatting with Alice, but she wasn't there. Next, I looked in the dining area, the patio, and even the small den where a group was playing cards. Still, no sign of her. An unsettling feeling crept over me as I ventured away from the main crowd. The laughter and chatter faded as I stepped into the quiet hallway leading to the bedrooms. The corridor was eerily silent, and all the doors were shut. Stopping at the first door, I pressed my ear against it but heard nothing. Moving to the next, I strained to catch any sound, yet the silence persisted. I passed the restroom and finally reached the last door at the end of the hall. Through the heavy wooden door, faint voices filtered out. My pulse quickened as I leaned closer, trying to discern the words. After a few seconds, I realized the voice belonged to a woman. She was laughing softly, but it wasn't Stephanie. Relieved yet uneasy, I stepped away from the door and approached the final one. My heart pounded in my chest as I stopped in front of it. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then, clear as day, I heard Stephanie's laugh, gentle and unmistakable. My stomach twisted. Her laughter was followed by murmured whispers, too faint to make out, and then a sound I couldn't mistake. Soft moans. My hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling. It felt as if the ground beneath me was crumbling away. My chest tightened as anger and despair surged through me in equal measure. Taking a deep breath, I steadied myself and turned the knob. The door swung open, and my world shattered. Stephanie was on the bed, entangled with Ryan. The sheets were disheveled, his shirt undone, and her dress discarded. At first, they didn't even notice me standing there. I froze, unable to process the scene before me. Every part of me wanted to scream, but I stood motionless, paralyzed by the betrayal unfolding in front of my eyes as Stephanie's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with shock. My voice was barely above a whisper, trembling with suppressed anger. Unbelievable, Stephanie. This is beyond anything I could imagine. She stammered. Ben, this isn't. Don't, I interrupted, my voice unsteady. I've seen enough. Ryan, lounging casually against the headboard, looked completely unfazed. It's not what you think, man. Relax. A bitter laugh escaped me. Not what I think. That's the best excuse you've got. Stephanie, tears now streaking her face, frantically grabbed the sheet to cover herself. Her voice cracked as she said, Ben, let me explain. Explain? I scoffed, the ache in my chest threatening to crush me. There's nothing left to explain. Unable to stay any longer, I turned and stormed out of the room. My mind raced with disbelief and hurt. How could she do this? How could she destroy everything we had? She hurried after me down the hallway. Ben, wait. Please stop. It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking. I spun around, my voice dripping with anger. Oh, now it's the alcohol's fault? You were perfectly aware of what you were doing when you smiled at him across the room. Don't act like this just happened out of nowhere. She flinched, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for this to happen. I love you, Ben. Love me? I yelled, my voice breaking. You don't betray someone you love like this. You don't humiliate them. Our argument was beginning to draw attention. Guests at the party turned to watch, whispering among themselves. Alice appeared, her face full of concern. What's going on? She asked, looking between us. I glared at her. Ask your friend. She has plenty to explain. Stephanie broke down, burying her face in her hands. Alice placed a hand on her shoulder and then looked back at me, trying to calm the situation. Ben, Let's talk this out in private. Please. I shook my head, my voice cold. I'm done talking. Enjoy the rest of your party. Without another word, I grabbed my coat and walked out into the night. Sitting in my car, I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my hands trembling. Hours passed as I aimlessly drove through the dark streets, replaying the scene in my head over and over. The images of Stephanie and Ryan haunted me, each one sharper and more painful than the last. I was a storm of emotions, rage, betrayal, sorrow. I had no answers, only questions that tore at my sanity. One thing was clear. I couldn't go home. Not yet. My phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with Stephanie's name. I ignored it. She called again and again, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Just seeing her name made my stomach churn. Eventually, I found myself at Damon's house. He was one of the few people I trusted implicitly. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I knocked on his door. "Ben? What the hell?" "It's the middle of the night," Damon mumbled, groggy as he opened the door. "I know, man. I'm sorry," I said, my voice shaky. But I didn't know where else to go. Seeing the look on my face, he stepped aside to let me in. "Come in. Tell me what's going on." I sank onto the couch, my hands trembling as I tried to collect myself. Damon sat across from me, his expression etched with worry. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "She betrayed me," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I caught her. With him." Damon leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "In the bedroom," I said, my voice breaking. "Stephanie with Ryan. I saw them together. There's no doubt." I struggled to find the words as my thoughts spiraled around how close they had been. Damon sat quietly, his face a mix of shock and disbelief. "This is unreal," he finally said, shaking his head. "It's true," I replied, my voice heavy. "I saw it with my own eyes. I don't even know how to process this. I can't go back home, not now. I can't even look at her. Maybe I'll just stay at a hotel for the night." Damon gave me a sharp look. "A hotel? Are you serious? You shouldn't be alone right now. Stay here instead. Are you sure?" I asked hesitantly, still reeling from everything. "Of course," he said firmly. "You're not going anywhere tonight." Relieved, I nodded. "Thanks, man. I really appreciate it." I leaned back on the couch, trying to gather my thoughts, but my phone kept buzzing. Stephanie's name lit up the screen again and again. I couldn't bring myself to answer, my thumb hesitating over the screen each time before the calls went to voicemail. Then another call came through, and another. Damon glanced at me. "She's been calling non-stop since you left, hasn't she?" I nodded, unable to speak. Each ring felt like a reminder of her betrayal, cutting deeper into the wound. After a long silence, Damon finally asked, "What are you planning to do now?" I exhaled shakily, the weight of the decision pressing on me. "I'm going to file for divorce," I said, my voice low but resolute. Even though doubts lingered, those words felt like a definitive step forward. Damon nodded in understanding. "If you need a good lawyer, I know someone. I can give you his contact info." "Thanks," I murmured sincerely. The next morning, I knew I couldn't avoid the house forever. With a heavy heart, I drove back, intending to gather some essentials. When I stepped inside, the air felt heavy. Stephanie was on the couch, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She stood as soon as she saw me. "Ben, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked past her and headed upstairs to pack. In the bedroom, I grabbed a few clothes, just what I needed to get by for now. I could feel her presence in the doorway, watching me. "Ben," she said softly, "please just listen. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It was a mistake. We can fix this. Please believe me." Still holding the clothes in my arms, I turned to her, my voice calm but firm. "A mistake? That's what you're calling it." She looked away, unable to meet my eyes, though guilt was written all over her face. "I can't get it out of my head," I continued. "That image of you with him, it's burned into my mind. I can't stay here, Stephanie. I'm filing for divorce." Her face went pale. "Ben, no. Please, I'm begging you. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything to make this right. Just give me another chance." But I shook my head, my heart heavy with finality. "It's too late for that." I gathered the rest of my things and walked out without looking back. Once I got into my car, I knew there was no turning back. I couldn't keep living a lie. The divorce was finalized in a few months. Stephanie tried calling a few more times, but I ignored her every time. I had to move forward. Damon was there for me, helping me navigate the process and giving me the support I needed. Though the pain lingered, I slowly began to rebuild my life. Starting over wasn't easy, but I knew it was the only way. In time, I found peace. I didn't regret leaving. It was the right thing to do. And while it took time, I learned to live again, free from the shadows of betrayal.